for me, I'm like, I start skating as an adult. So it's like fantastic. Right? You got all the room. You're like 100 days. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a lot different. It's tired. Yeah, that's true. We realize though. You get all kinds of these. Are you coming out today? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be watching.
All right, we're gonna get started with our last session here. This is going to be the Vegas Golden Knights mock expansion draft. And it's my great pleasure to introduce a man who probably needs no introduction in this, but instead he gave me 10 paragraphs. So Rob is an author, speaker, consultant, and longtime pioneer in hockey analytics. His innovative hockey statistics, such as player usage charts, history-based projection, and coaching metrics, have helped win Stanley Cups and gold medals and shape the way teams are built and the game is covered. Rob's work can be found every week on NHL.com and ESPN Insider, where he's been featured since 2008-2009 season. In all, Rob's written over 800 columns for a variety of hockey websites and been featured in Hockey News, the Globe and Mail, the Washington Post, Forbes, and the Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone, nice, I didn't know that one. He's authored 3 books in his own Bill James-inspired hockey abstract series, including the highly popular 2006 book Stat Shot. And there'll be a hockey abstract coming out in the fall, Rob?
Yeah, in English and French.
Très bien. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Ullman.
All right, thanks for everyone for being here, and also thanks as well again to my close friends Michael and Shirley, who always do a great job with this presentation, with this conference, making me feel welcome. Making me feel welcome like an NHL goal review judge in Anaheim. I just feel so loved, so loved.
Oh, that's
It really is a pleasure to be here. It's great to see so many of you here. I understand there is a hockey game going on and you've chosen to stick with us and have fun. Well, your reward is this final presentation. It's not going to be a bunch of numbers and tables, although we do have a few numbers and tables. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's a mock expansion draft. We're going to have a lot of fun. In fact, let me just go right now to what we're going to do here. First, I'm just going to give a little bit of background for those of you who may not be up to speed on the details of the Vegas Golden Knights, their franchise, the rules, what we're talking about. Then I sort of broke things down into 3 sections. One is our effort to set realistic and ideal protection lists for all the 30 teams. Then the various roster picking strategies that are available to the Vegas Golden Knights. And then third, we have a number of projection models that can actually try to predict how well each of those different strategies would play out. Where are they going to be in the standings? Where are their strengths going to be? Where are their weaknesses going to be? What to expect in real life? And then the real pearl, the real best part of this entire presentation is the final part, which is the Q&A. Because at that point, I'm going to bring forward, my friends that helped me set the protection lists, the ones that picked the rosters, the ones that built the models. We're going to have a lot of them up here. We're going to have a great discussion about, for instance, why certain players were protected over another, about maybe the impact if one player was traded, how that would affect Vegas strategies. And again, why perhaps they selected one exposed player over another. So really, that's the pearl of it. The rest is just sort of the crap you got to get through to get there. So that's also what I mean there when I say Rob Ullman and friends. That's what we're going to go through. But now, before I dive right in, before I even do the background, I just want to do a quick test right here, a quick survey, a quick poll. Raise your hand if you think the Vegas Golden Knights, without knowing anything else that we're going to do, who thinks the Vegas Golden Knights are going to finish last or perhaps next to last in the NHL in their first season? I'm going to estimate that at maybe a third of us. Right? Okay, how many think that the Vegas Golden Knights, if they play their cards properly, have at least a 50-50 chance of making the playoffs in their first season? Raise your hand. I'm thinking maybe 10 or 11. Not a lot there. Okay, so it sounds like everyone else sort of thinks they're in the middle, but raise your hand. I'm just going to do this if you'll humor me. Raise your hand if you think we get at least 80 points, right? We're going to start at 80 points. Now keep your hand up there as I go up through the numbers. So 80 points. Okay, 81, 82, 83, 84, 84. We got about 5 hands left at 84. Okay, so I just want to get a rough survey at sort of what the perception of the room is before we begin. I'm going to tell you, once we're done everything, we're going to repeat these questions and see if you still feel the same way. All right, background. Here we go. So, the Vegas Golden Knights were granted a franchise on June 22nd, 2016. George McPhee was named GM on June 13. Obviously, those dates are wrong. Can anyone tell me is that supposed to be July? Does anyone know off the top of their head? July 13, 2016, okay. Don't worry, I'm sure the rest of the presentation is without mistakes. Just the rest of it. The expansion draft itself will occur June 20th, 2017. The official protection lists are published June 17th, and yes, we will get to see them, which is wonderful. So once those protection lists come out, you'll have a chance to pick a fantasy roster and maybe compare what we're doing here against the actual protection lists. The Vegas Golden Knights will then draft third in the NHL draft, June 23rd and 24th. The asterisk is for an obvious reason. They actually draft sixth in the first round because the draft lottery determines the order of the first round. But every subsequent round they're going to be drafting third. And then the team will begin play in the coming 2017-18 season in the Pacific Division. So that's a bit of a background of what we're talking about right now. Okay, protection lists. So, every team can protect some of their players from the expansion draft. The basic rules are you can protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, 1 goalie, or you can protect 8 skaters and 1 goalie. You must protect players that have unwaived no movement clauses. Now, some players may choose to waive that clause, in which case you don't have to protect them, but otherwise you have to protect them. So Dion Phaneuf has to take up one of Ottawa's spots, for example, unless he waives it. You don't need to protect first and second year players. Players on their first and second year of professional contracts, they're not eligible to be selected. Also, those who are on long-term injured reserves, and that list has already been released. Those are players, again, like Chris Pronger. You can't pick Chris Pronger. Can't pick Mark Savard, I'm sorry. They're not included. And then every team must expose at least 1 defenseman, 2 forwards, with a minimum of 40 games this season, or 70 games in the past 2 seasons combined. So you might actually see some teams who haven't addressed that concern scramble to pick up some depth players that have satisfied those conditions. Plus, you have to expose a goalie, and all 4 of these players have to be under contract for the coming season. And by the way, if you can't really keep up with all these special rules, one of the handiest things is we have Cat Friendly, who've built a wonderful website. I'm going to show you right now. In fact, I believe they're still here at the back. They'll come up later to answer questions as well. How about, just before I get into this, how about a quick round of applause for Cat Friendly doing that? Longer, I haven't put this on in. Okay. All right, so Cat Friendly. Okay, so for those of you that maybe have your iPads or your phones or your other devices open and you want to have some fun to kill the time while I'm talking, you can go to catfriendly.com. That's the URL right here, and you don't have to choose a drop down. Just click on the logo right there, and you go to their expansion draft tool. Once you're on their expansion draft tool, a special thing they've added just for us, a little secret, little life hack. Add OTTHAC right there, and that's going to auto-load our protection lists. And I'll get into our protection lists in a moment. Now what that does is that automatically loads the protection lists that we have designed for each of the teams. And then from there, you can actually select your team. You can do that today, you can do that when you get home, you can do that this weekend, but this will be available up until the time the draft actually occurs. And you'll also notice that Cat Friendly has all these nice features. They can actually, make sure that you've abided by all these. So if you go to draft team here, it actually makes sure, for instance, you've drafted all 30 players, that you have at least 14 forwards, 9 defensemen, 3 goalies, you have 20 players under contract. It's making sure that you've, first of all, they've already made sure that our protection lists are legal. Now they're going to make sure that your team is legal, and when you're done, you can actually take a look at what your team is. So that's something you can do. Okay. And thanks to Cat Friendly for that. So that's how we built our protection lists. Now, when we built our protection lists, obviously we have no idea what the protection lists are actually going to be. First of all, none of us are, of course, with those organizations. Like nobody involved was with one of these organizations or recently or currently. And furthermore, a lot of things can change between now and June. A lot of things. There's still trades to be made. There's still contracts to be signed. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and now. So even if we did come up with accurate protection lists, they could easily change dramatically between now and then. So we just did the best we could. Now, we weren't trying to make realistic. We weren't trying to guess the exact protection lists. We were trying to put forward the ideal protection lists. And in some cases, for instance, we believe that our protection lists are superior than the ones the teams are actually going to choose. But at the same time, we wanted to be realistic. In order to do that, we had a list reviewed by TSN's Frank Saravalli, and also a couple of former NHL front office executives, Frank Provenzano, who was with the Washington Capitals and also the assistant GM with the Dallas Stars, and Bob Teofilo, who was formerly the director of hockey analytics, among other titles, for the Arizona Coyotes. So this was just sort of a way to make sure that the judgments we are putting forward were realistic, were credible, because some of the things we wanted to do were just not realistic. For example, some of us might, for instance, want to expose Seabrook, ask Seabrook to waive his no movement clause and expose him, because he's a great defenseman, that is a really, really tough contract, and Chicago's really cap-strapped. So some of us might want to do that, but of course that would not be realistic, that would not be a credible thing to do, and it probably would not be advisable for other reasons that have nothing to do with stats. So moves like that were shut down. But we did make some judgments about no movement clause, and we'll summarize those in a moment. And like I mentioned, of course, a lot can happen between now and then. So again, key point, protection list. We want them to be ideal, but still realistic. So who set the protection lists? Well, we divided ourselves into teams so we could actually study the numbers behind all these teams. We could check with some local reporters, some local bloggers, do some research, really dig in and actually get a pretty good account of who the players should be to protect. So these are the 4 teams of 4. We divided by division. And when we get to the Q&A, we're going to have one representative from each of these divisions come up and join me. And they're going to be able to answer questions about why, say, one player was protected over another, or perhaps what would the impact be if a certain move were made. For just one example that I'll give you, I noticed a lot of people in the crowdsourced team that we picked. They chose Vladislav Nemestikov off the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, what would happen, for instance, if Tampa Bay made a move and actually wound up protecting him or trading him elsewhere? What would the impact of that be? And so, for instance, when that comes up, we can ask, the representative from the Atlantic Division to actually comment on what the impact would be to the protection lists if something like that occurred. I think it's going to be Derek that represents them, if I'm not mistaken. And also, we'll have a moment to introduce them and give them some applause later, but I would like to really thank the great work everyone on this list did. Not everyone can be here today, but we do have at least one person from each team that can talk to it. I do want to recap some of the interesting choices. Now you can see all the choices for yourself if you've got your laptop open and you add the OTTHAC to the URL. You can actually see the protection list for yourself. And of course I can bring it up when we get around to discussing it for the Q&A. But essentially some of the more interesting choices I wanted to highlight is that the 2 no movement clauses that we really wanted to waive and that the experts agreed it's realistic that it can be waived are Kevin Bieksa and Marc-Andre Fleury, because quite frankly it sounds like the Anaheim Ducks would be a little bit of a pickle if they have to protect Bieksa. They have a lot of defensemen to protect, and if they do choose to use that 8 skater 1 goalie protection, then that means they're exposing forwards like Jacob Silverberg or something like that. So it's pretty important that they manage to waive Kevin Bieksa. And of course, teams always do have the option to buy out a player if they want as well. And then Marc-Andre Fleury, that one's a little bit more obvious, even though he's been sensational in the playoffs. If you're Pittsburgh Penguins, show of hands, who would protect Matt Murray? And who would protect Marc-Andre Fleury? Yeah, I don't want to have my hand up either. Okay. Players that were exposed. So there are a lot of players that are good players, but their contracts are kind of long-term and kind of pricey, and some of these teams are up against the cap. So you'll find there's actually some pretty good players available, some of whom the Vegas Golden Knights might be interested in. You got Troy Brouwer from Calgary, Dustin Brown from Los Angeles was exposed, Mike Camilleri from New Jersey, Jack Johnson in Columbus, Alexander Steen in St. Louis. Now, I've had some people tell me that chances are not all these players will be exposed, but we still felt it was a realistic, incredible scenario for these players to be exposed, even if their teams probably won't do it. Also, there's a bunch of unrestricted free agents that can be exposed. The prominent ones here are Bishop, Oshie, and Thornton. And at first you might ask yourself, well, why would Vegas pick an unrestricted free agent? Because they just become a free agent a week later. And the answer could be that they actually plan on signing that player, or that they might try to flip that player. And in order to, if these teams actually think they can sign them, then they would actually protect them. But obviously Ben Bishop, for instance, is not going to be signed and protected because they already have Jonathan Quick. So we felt that Bishop, Oshie, and Thornton will very likely be exposed. Protected, one of the interesting names that we protected was Thomas Plekanec. One of the reasons I say that's interesting is because if you notice that sort of the crowdsourced protection list they have on Cap Friendly, Plekanec was not protected. And if you read some of the beat writing that goes on in Montreal, there's a lot of speculation that Plekanec will not be protected, and instead they're going to protect one of their value line forwards like Paul Byron or Mitchell or something like that. And then finally some judgment calls that really could go either way. Let's just quickly ask you guys as well here. Between Pickard and Varlamov, you're Colorado protecting a goalie. Who's protecting Calvin Pickard? Who's protecting Semyon Varlamov? 50-50, roughly. If you're Minnesota, who's protecting Jonas Brodin? A very enthusiastic hand over there, but and then who's protecting Matt Dumba? Quite a few. We wound up protecting Brodin in that situation. With the Islanders, who's protecting Calvin DeHaan? And that was the most enthusiastic hand of the day. And then who's protecting Travis Hamonic? Well, the majority. We went with DeHaan, right? His numbers are excellent. And then in San Jose, who's protecting Paul Martin? The Prime Minister. Okay, a few people there. And who's protecting Justin Braun? Now let's throw this out. Who's protecting David Schlemko? Okay, there's always one in every group. All right. So those are the judgment calls. You can go either way on this, right? Okay, roster selection. As you saw on the Cap Friendly site, it will manage all these rules for you. Don't worry. So you don't have to, but I'll recap it, but don't worry. They'll keep track of all the rules on Cap Friendly. You have to select, the Vegas Golden Knights will have to select 14 forwards, 9 defensemen, 3 goalies, which leaves them with 4 open spots. Let me just make sure. 30 minus... Yeah, 4 open spots. At least 20 of those 30 players have to have a contract for the coming season, and the sum of those contracts must be between 60% and, of course, 100% of the salary cap. Now, of course, if they use up 100% of the salary cap and still have unsigned players, that's going to be a problem. But and they're also not allowed to buy out players for the first year. That's just not an option. Of the players they draft, they can sign someone and buy them out right away. But the players they select, they cannot buy out. Okay, so mock roster. So again, we used Cap Friendly, a great site, which, as I mentioned, added the feature to autoload our selections. And I didn't give the teams, let's go back to the teams here. Now, each of these groups that set a protection list, they also picked an entire roster. So once we had those protections lists set, I gave them the protection list, and they all collaborated on picking a Vegas Golden Knights roster. And I didn't give them any instructions. I didn't say, hey, make your team as competitive as possible. I didn't say, hey, build for the future. I didn't say, I didn't give them any instructions. I just said, pick a team that's legal, and then you can sort of explain why you made certain choices, and we can see the outcome of the different strategies. So these teams really had different strategies. These groups have different strategies when protecting their team. So I just said whatever you think is best, and then you can explain your philosophy. For instance, I remember Mike Schucker sent me an email with his team, and he went into great detail about some of his picks and why he made those picks. And of course, I plan to share with you my own philosophy in great detail. So again, more talking by me. And also just have a little bit of fun. I also opened the window to some pundits, some experts out there. Some of them beloved, some of them are people we like to compete against. And the ones that really stepped forward and had some fun with us include Darren Pang, Steve Coulias, Scott Cullen, who's here right now, and Steve Simmons. And so they really had a lot of fun with this, by the way. I mean, all of them pretty much were sending me emails back and forth, having a great time. And it's really fun to compare sort of what we come up with to what they come up with. Because with the exception of Scott Cullen, they don't really use numbers. They're basically, using their experience with the teams and their understanding of these players, from the eye test almost exclusively. So here's some of the popular choices that I noticed. I noticed, for instance, the blue line. There's a lot of consensus on the blue line among these 11 teams. The 5 experts, the 4 groups, me and Mike Shuckers. That's 11 teams. I told you there'd be a little bit of math. There's a lot of popular choices on the blue line I noticed. For instance, almost everyone picked Josh Manson among us. Almost everyone picked Josh Manson. Trevor Van Riemsdyk was a very popular pick. In fact, I believe he's a popular pick that was crowdsourced on Cap Friendly as well. Matt Dumbo was a popular pick. I also noticed on the blue line, for instance, Florida. Some people wanted Pissick, some people wanted Petrovic, but there was a defenseman being taken from Florida. So a lot of the picks, Colorado, Zadorov or Barberio, so there's a lot of consensus on how the blue line was going to be built. I'm not going to say Petrovic anymore. Okay, then up front, there wasn't as much commonality. And where there was commonality, it was usually a depth player, like Paul Byron or, I'm just going to cough again, Vladimir Domestikov. I also noticed there were a lot of teams where there was absolutely no agreement. For instance, I listed 10 teams here that had no agreement. I noticed in most of these cases, the reason there was no agreement is because there's not a lot of strong players on any of these teams. That's not the case in all of these. For instance, the Islanders will have at least one good defenseman exposed, but in a lot of these teams, there's really not anyone of particular value exposed, which actually is an opportunity for these teams because they could perhaps call up, at Tampa Bay and say, well, we have room to protect another good player. Don't lose Domestikov for nothing. We'll give you a second-round pick. We'll give you something. So these are, I think, the teams that perhaps might be in the best position to make a trade. Except the Islanders. I also noticed when we picked our teams, there was a lot of cap space. The average cap space was over 23 million. That was what was left over when people picked their teams. And that ranged from anywhere from 12.8. Most of the experts used up as much money as possible, so they were at the lower end. And then actually my team had the most space left over, 35.1. I'll explain why when I show you my team. And there was an average of 7.6 unsigned players to spend that money on, between 6 and 12 per team. And of course, keep in mind that, of course, a lot of these players can be traded prior to the draft or the NHL trade deadline. Just because you pick a player, just because Vegas picks a player doesn't mean he's going to be on the team. He might just be flipped for another asset. But there's a lot of cap space available, some of which we've already seen them use up when they signed Shipyachov from the KHL. And they're apparently going after Dadonov as well. Okay, then once we had our teams picked, we threw them into some projection models to answer the question, how good will these teams be in year one and going forward? What will their strengths and weaknesses be? What is the impact of various roster selection strategies? And then, of course, we've had some models built by the venerable Michael Blake McCurdy, Matt Kane, who actually left to go to the Ottawa Sounders game, so we're just going to skip his projections. Emmanuel Perry, everyone knows him from Corsica Hockey, and apparently I'm supposed to say something about his salad. Then don't tell me about Hart, that's not his real name. I just don't know if I'm allowed to use his real name or not, but he's not here. And then, and of course, a model written by the pair of Mark McConnell and Jordan Peck. I don't think they could make it. If I'm mistaken and you're here, raise your hand. Yeah, so we only have one in attendance here, so we are, no, not now, but in a few moments we're going to have Micah come up to explain his model, but not quite yet, because first I'm going to give sort of a general statement on how projection models are built. Okay, so when I talk about projection models, I'm talking very generically. I'm not talking specifically about the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm talking in general about how projection models are built. Now, before I get too far into it, who here has a copy of StatShot? The rest of you can get out. The first chapter of StatShot is basically how to use analytics as part of the team building process. And obviously, the Vegas Golden Knights expansion is obviously a great example of the team building process. Now, everyone has a slightly different way of building those team-based models. Like Micah and Matt and Emmanuel and Goat and Mark and Jordan, they all have different ways of building their models, and of course various NHL teams have different ways of building their models, but they all have certain things in common. And I'm just going to quickly summarize what those are. So you can build your own model, because quite frankly, you can. The first thing you need is a way to summarize a player's abilities into a single number. And there's a number, if you don't build your own, there's a number of stats out there you can use. For instance, there is wins above replacement. Who's heard of that one? There's a few different versions of that one. There's the old Andrew Thomas Sam Ventura one, but it's not really available anymore since they entered the front offices. But there is one currently available by, Don't Tell Me About Hart. And there's also GBT, the classic. That goes all the way back to 2003. That's the Ottawa one. And you can build your own. If you want to build your own, there's some really good instructions. There's some brief instructions in the first chapter of StatShot, but if you really want to get into it, then you also need to purchase the 2013 Blue Edition of Rob Bowman's Hockey Abstract. Who has that one? All right. Get them an extra raffle ticket. So you can build your own. So that's the first thing you need, right? A way to summarize players' contributions in a single number, in terms of goals or wins. That's the first thing you need. Everyone's going to have their own way, but that's the first thing everybody needs. The second thing you need to do is you need to use that to establish the current level of performance. Now, a player's GDT, let's say, a player's WAR of the past season, that isn't how good they are. That's how good they were that season. You need to know how good they are, not how good they were last year. So what you do, or what you can do, is you can make a weighted average of the past 3 seasons for that player, or 4 or 2, but a weighted average of the players past. Then you need to calculate the skill-based component and the random variation component in that measurement, because a player's WAR from last season, a combination of their skill and just random ups and downs. So you need to identify how much of that total reading is that random up and down, and then remove it. And you remove it using statistical regression. Then, now you've got a picture. That's number 2. Now you've got a picture of how good the player is today. Now you need to know how good the player is going to be tomorrow and over the duration of his contract. In order to do that, you need an aging curve. Now, there's a lot of aging curves out there. You can just grab one. You can just Google NHL aging curve, or of course, you can grab the one from the first chapter of StatShot. But you can also build your own. It's very easy. But there's a very right way of building an aging curve and a very wrong way. The wrong way is just to group everybody by age. Just take everyone that's 23, everyone that's 24, everyone that's 25, and then compare their average WAR from year to year. That's the wrong way. Because that's going to have survivorship bias. By definition, the only players that are actually advancing to the next years are the players that are good. So it's going to give you the illusion that there is no age curve. The players don't get worse. You're going to have this big spike at 44 because of Jagger. You're going to say, we need to get some 44-year-olds. Is Bowman available? So what you want to do instead is you want to use the match pair method. You're basically looking at how a player's stats change as they go from 24 to 25. Anyway, so that's your, what am I at now? Your third piece? Fourth piece? Third? Well, one of those pieces. And then your final piece is to put that in terms of dollars, right? Because you have a very valuable player, but he can also be more expensive, and the money's better spent elsewhere. So the last piece you need to do is you need to find a way to convert your goal-based stat versus what you could get for the same cap hit, right? So for example, here in Ottawa, Bobby Ryan is having a great playoffs right now, and he still is a pretty good player, even though he's not what he used to be. But that is an awful contract. So even though he makes contributions, his contract is not an asset to the Ottawa Senators because it's too expensive, it's too long, it's too expensive. So no matter how much he produces, the Ottawa Senators are always better off spending that cap space somewhere else. Anyone disagree with that? Okay. I was just seeing if Bobby Ryan was in the room, right? And there you go. And that's how you build a projection model. So actually, it seems like a big task when you're first looking at it, but when you break it down into the 5 individual steps, it's something everyone can do. Or even if you don't want to do it, there are actually things that you can grab from other people in other places. You can grab someone's WAR. You can grab, someone's aging curve, and you can translate that by grabbing the cap hits off capfriendly.com. So there are tools out there to do all of this yourself. And by the way, I've seen a lot of models being built. They have different stats that capture all in one. They may have a different way of weighting the past, and they might have a different aging curve. They might have a different way of measuring it to the cap space. The Vegas Golden Knights, here's what we've learned, and we're going to bring everybody up in a moment to get into more detail. And of course, we're going to bring in Micah because he's got a bit more fine-grained detail on this. But essentially what we discovered is that Vegas will probably not finish last. No matter what they do, it's almost impossible for them to finish last. There's just too much talent available for them. At least that's how we see it today. Like I said, things can change between now and June. However, the team will have great difficulty scoring. They may be among the weakest teams in the league offensively. So even though they're solid defensively, they're going to have trouble scoring, and that's exactly why they went to the KHL. Where else are you going to get scoring if you can't get in the expansion draft and it's too expensive to get through free agency, and obviously they're not going to want to trade away prospects and picks to get in a trade. Where else are they going to get scoring? They've got the cap space, so that's exactly why. I mean, it was quite predictable that they go to the KHL to grab some scoring. They should be solid defensively, as I said. In terms of goaltending, that could make the difference next season between whether they're competitive and whether they're not. Unfortunately, and there is a potential for excellent, unfortunately it's hard to predict how well the goaltending will do. It's hard to predict who they'll pick. It's hard to predict how well they'll play. So their goaltending could be anywhere from around average to actually quite excellent. And that will, I think, determine their fate next year. And of course, if you add in the impact of trades and free agents like Shipyachov and trades, they can only get better from basically the estimates here, which are why the playoffs are a slim possibility. So here's what we came up with. These are the results of 4 of the 5 models. Micah will show you his separately. But here are the results of the 4 models. Excuse me. So the 4 models first are the first column is Emmanuel Perry. Then Don't Tell Me About Hart. Then the McConnell. Where is it?
Pack.
There they go. Oh. McConnell Peck model, and then the Matt Kane model. And then I just made an average of the 4, even though there's no statistical reason to do that. I just did that, and then ordered them by the average. And then you can see we actually have 12 teams here, and I'll explain why in a moment. You can see all the teams here, and I've ordered them based on the average performance of the 4 models, not counting Micah's. And you'll notice that the team's going to finish between 80 and 88 points. At least that's the average of the 4 models. Mike Shuckers can take a bow. His team was at the top of that tight range. And you can see the different teams here. Now at the very top here, let me just talk about the Emmanuel Perry line. The reason that I didn't really count that one here is because he himself said that team is sort of a gaming the system team. Like he sort of, rather than pick a team and see how it did, he actually sort of did it backwards. He said, what would the ultimate team be? And then sort of reverse engineered it into the team. So he very deliberately said, what's the best possible team you could craft? And sort of reverse engineered it. And we had time to feed that into a few of the models. And so that's really the high watermark that a team could achieve. But again, like I said, they can still improve from there with trades and free agency and other things that happen in the draft. So those are the results that we had for our various teams, and we're going to get into the Q&A in a moment. First of all, does any of this surprise you? Who is not really surprised? This is pretty much the outcome you would expect. Not very many hands. Who thought this is a lot better than you thought Vegas would be? Who thinks this is actually worse and Vegas is going to be better than this? Okay, nobody. Good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring the teams up here on the browser, and I'm also going to bring up one member from each of our teams. Each of them, come on up. There's one representative for each of these teams, and Mike is also going to come up, and I'm going to hand it over to him once I'm done the introductions, and he's going to walk us through his model, specifically his model, and then he's going to take some time to show some more specific results about what to expect from the Vegas Golden Knights based on our rosters. And after that, we're going to have a bit of really the fun of this whole thing is to have a bit of a discussion. I'm going to host a discussion here about the protection lists. So while Micah gets set up, I'm going to do some introductions. Probably don't need this, but you can get yourself set up here. So we've got one representative from each of the groups. We'll start with Cindy. Just introduce yourself, your group, and a few things that you enjoy doing as part of this whole exercise.
Hi, my name is Cindy Stipe. I'm actually from Columbus, Ohio, and I was the captain of the Metropolitan Division. And I have always been passionate about hockey, and so doing something like this really made it so I did not envy George McPhee.
My name is Derek Brave. I couldn't agree more. I think George McPhee has a very tough task on his hands, but it is an intriguing concept. The expansion draft is idiosyncratic. It doesn't happen very often, so a lot of interesting quirks, a lot of edge cases to solve, so it's a fun exercise.
And I'm Rob Goldman. I wrote a book about hockey analytics.
I'm Mitch Cole. I'm actually from Boston, a little ways from home. The thing I like most about this is really interesting. We haven't seen the expansion draft since, I believe, early 2000s, and really to be part of this project was really cool to be able to take a team and kind of see, based on these models, how we do and how they might perform was, something that was really interesting to me. So being part of a team that would be able to pick a roster was, something that intrigued me, and I had a lot of fun with it.
Hi everyone, so my name is Mike Zoltz. To clarify, so up on the list on the Pacific team there's the name Andrew Carrison. That's the name I blog under for anonymity online, but that's gone. These guys touched on the reasons this was a super fun exercise, but just to shout out to Josh Lutz, Ben Saltiel, and Shirley Mills for their help on Team Pacific.
Okay, I'm going to turn over to Micah. He's going to give us a brief overview of his model and then show us the results.
Thank you very much. Let's just to take away all suspense, let's put something up that you can stare at. So this is, some of you may have seen this graphic. It's I sometimes like to call it the Knickerbocker glory of stats, the rainbow tornado. It's very busy because I took all of the Vegas rosters that I looked at and I put them side by side, so with overlapping players, with the existing teams. So some players are on multiple teams if they were drafted into multiple things. The model itself is the one that I use for all of it's called Cordelia. It's the one that underlies all of the predictive stuff that I put out on Twitter. And the pieces that are in it's essentially shots for, shots against. That's the 5-on-5 offense, 5-on-5 defense. Those are shot totals, shot rates I should say. 5-on-5 goaltending is 5-on-5 save percentage. The suitably regressed for rookies, 5-on-5 shooting percentage is just that. And the PP and PK terms are shot rates on the penalty kill and shot rates on the power play. And minors drawn and minors taken are the very small, extremely small pieces. And so this is trained on 7 or 8 years of data, and I've been enjoying it very much. And the first thing to notice is that all of the rosters that we saw, more or less, are in the middle of the pack. A handful of them, Steve Koulias and Michael Schucker's in this, came quite low. And a couple of them, the Central and the Metropolitan teams, are actually slightly above average. But on the whole, you're looking at a very, very middle of the road roster. So this is a lot to look at. And I decided but I wanted to, first of all, the real point is just to see where do the teams rank. And this has neutral sites because different stats impact your likelihood of winning differently if you're the home team or the road team. In a very general way, home defense matters more than road defense, and home offense matters less. So if you're good in the one particular type, then you'll be a little bit better on the road or a little bit better away. Sorry, at home. So to make things a little bit easier to see, I took out the existing teams so that we could compare just the Vegas teams and see just how similar they are. So here's just the rosters that we've been recently discussing, and the first thing you should notice is how incredibly similar they all are. The distinctions between them, I'm really, part of why I like to present stuff graphically where I don't ever use tables is that I don't ever want to trail too many decimal places onto something, and so the distinctions here are quite small. So but also notice that it's not just that the numerical values, if you were to add them up in your head somehow, are small. It's that the teams all look similar. They all have the same strengths. They all have the same weaknesses. Just like Rob said earlier, that the strengths are all defense, and the weaknesses are all offense. Is the kind of and part of what's unusual about Vegas is that they're going to be an unusually homogenous team. The difference between the very best player and the very weakest player that they draft is going to be much tighter than the same difference between the very best and the very weakest on every level. So you're going to get that fabled consistency that you might enjoy that or not. So I looked at a couple other things. First of all, you'll notice that a lot of the variation there is from goaltending. And goaltending is by far the most contentious part of every predictive model. And so I decided to take a look at skater-only prediction. So I just took the goalies out of the model. I just said their influence was nothing at all. So you just have to know that the goalie impact will be additional. And also, for Vegas in particular, I think they're going to, their home performance is going to be a little bit more interesting for their specific relevance than their total performance. The expectations are, we're hyping them up a little bit compared to what had been put about them in the press previously. But they're still going to be playing more for their home crowd than for road crowds, especially early on. So I took a look at what they would look like if you just looked at their predicted performance when they're at home. So this is home new teams with skaters only. And now you see that actually the uniformity is even more pronounced than it was before. So, if you really think that Eddie Lack is suddenly bad, which my model does these days, then the teams which happen to choose him look very bad. And Rob said earlier, and he was right, that how well the Vegas goaltenders perform is going to be an enormous determinant. But my talk this morning notwithstanding, it's still extremely difficult to gauge which goaltenders are going to perform well, which ones are not. Although you can see the uniform strength of defense suggests that it may actually be slightly more predictable for Vegas how their goaltenders will perform than other teams. So that's the quick rundown, and you'll notice that there's really only differences of degree, not of type. There really isn't any way to make a different kind of Vegas team than this one. So the players' names may well change, but this is probably what we can expect.
Thanks, Micah. Stick around for some questions, please, if you don't mind. Let's take a look at my team first. So if you want to look at the teams yourself, again, you go into Cap Friendly, go to the forums, choose expansion draft, and then I'm a few pages in. If you look for the ones that start with OTTHAC, like for instance, there's Mike's, there's the Metropolitan, there's Pacific. Go back a little bit further. Still further. Page 7, there's Darren Payne. There's Scott Cullen's first attempt. We're not going to talk about that one, right, Scott? There's Steve Cooley. There we go. Here's mine. So if you want to see everyone's, we're gonna go through the 4 teams we have here plus mine. But if you want to see everybody's team, including Scott Cullen's, including Darren Payne's, including Steve Cooley's, you can go ahead and do that by just going to Cap Friendly, like I showed you, and finding their roster, which will start with the _OTTHAC. Anything that starts with OTTHAC is one of the crowdsourced ones that we did together. So here's my team. Starting in nets, I grabbed Antti Ranta with Philip Grubauer and Jack Campbell. As you can see, this is not where I wanted to invest a lot of money. Actually, first of all, I really love Antti Ranta. I believe that Matt Murray, Scott Darling, and Antti Ranta are the 3 best goalies in the league that are not currently already established #1 goalies. And of course, we saw what happened to Darling. So I don't believe Ranta is going to be available for the Vegas Golden Knights. That's my prediction. I believe New York Rangers are going to trade him once their season is over, rather than lose him for nothing. But if he is available, I think they're going to be on Ranta like a fat kid on a Smartie. He's gone for sure. Although, I might add, even though I didn't pick him, I might add that it's not a bad strategy to pick Ben Bishop and then trade him. Ben Bishop becomes unrestricted free agent, but if you grab him, you could probably trade his rights for a second round pick or something like that for someone trying to get a 2 or 3 day head start. And it's not a bad idea for them to start picking up draft picks. And the reason I'm specifically mentioning Ben Bishop is I don't really think there's a great alternative option to pick out of Los Angeles. For instance, I'm not sure I would pick, say, I don't know, Joe Thornton, right? Because he's a penny UFA, because I'd much rather have Justin Braun or the San Jose Shark of your choice, whoever it happens to be, but there's going to be some good Sharks available, I think. So there's my blue line. Some people, wince when I have Danny DeKaiser there, I think ultimately, I think we've all agreed that they're going to have a good blue line, they're going to have good defense. Your exact picks might be a little bit different than mine, but the basic idea is you got a sort of a 6-man blue line of number 4 defensemen, of number 3 and number 4 defensemen. And however, that may sound bad, but I think a collection of number 3 or number 4 defensemen, good ones, is probably better than half the NHL. So even though you might have slightly different choices here, you might pick, say, Petrovic instead of Pissick, you might pick Barbarian instead of Zadorov, you might pick a few guys differently than I did here, but how many people think that this blue line, roughly speaking, is better than league average? All right. That's more people than bought Stat Shot, that's great. Forwards, I had a lot more trouble, obviously, because I just didn't see, I think we all agreed, there's just not as much offensive talent there. So I really think up front is where Vegas can take a few more risks. I think the key mentality the Vegas Golden Knights have to have here, and I tweeted about this, some people mentioned it, is they're not trying to pick a roster at the expansion draft, in my view. They're not trying to pick a roster. They're trying to get assets they could not normally otherwise get. Normally you get assets through the draft, and they're going to have a draft, or through free agency, which they'll have, or through trades, which they'll have plenty of. But this is their one and only opportunity to get players and contracts without having to give anything up. So the key here is just to get the 30 most valuable assets. And the assets here are not the players, the assets are the contracts, right? So they're trying to get the 30 most valuable contracts in my mind. And that's especially the mentality I had when I was looking at the forwards. So let's take a look now at we'll go quickly over each of these rosters, and we can determine, we'll start with the Pacific, because that one's next. Is this the latest Pacific roster? This is the latest Pacific one? Who's Pacific? That's not the latest? Okay. If there's more than one, you kind of have to go back and...
It'll be from Monday.
It'll be from Monday? Okay. There's Scott's. We could pick on Scott and click on that one, but that's his first pass. Trust me, you don't want to look at that one. Is this the most recent Atlantic on Monday? This one here? No, we did one? Okay. This one's Atlantic. Is this the Atlantic? Yeah. Latest one? Okay, go ahead. You can use that microphone.
So I think that, I'm not going to go through player by player, just to kind of give a high level, what were our priorities. It's a tall task. I think Rob presented kind of an asset-based theory. I definitely wanted to stay away from the UFAs. It was my personal philosophy. I was happy to have a fairly expensive goaltending core because of the homogeneity of the rest of the team. If there was one area where I was happy to maybe take on a bad contract or spend a little extra dough, it was definitely in net, which contrasts with, I believe, either Miko or Blake's theory on that. But when we really got down to drafting the team, what were our priorities, I started with the best teams. So let's take the best available players off the best teams and then kind of whittle our way down. And the Colorados and the Buffaloes of the world didn't have a whole lot to offer. I wonder, Brian, a couple of old guys. So Brian Campbell, Mike Camilleri. I think Brian Campbell is phenomenally underrated. I'm happy to pay him whatever he wants. He can come and rush the puck over me all day long. And things like that. And then some of the younger guys, like Brandon Gons and William Carrier, Nick Shore. These are the kind of players that just seem to bubble up on certain screens. They always just kind of seem to come up to the top. And, whether or not that's due to their teammates or the teams they played on, that would be the risk. Because as I mentioned, try and pick the best available players from the good teams. And perhaps didn't do the best job adjusting for the quality of their teammates there.
Thanks, Derek. Let's see the next team we've got here. Central, is the latest Central on Sunday. So the better way of doing this is just go to the top page.
We made one mistake when we originally uploaded our roster. We picked the wrong goalie by accident. That was
Well, looks like Steve Birch. Okay. What do we got here? Monday. Yeah, everyone had to get the teams in rather early so we could feed them into the model, so we have to go back a little ways to get all the teams here. Let's, all the way to page 5, it looks like. There's Mike Shocker team. This must be, okay, Sears Metropolitan. Sydney?
Yeah. So with this, it was kind of the same thing. Like, there were some teams where we would just look and go, well, who do we pick? Because there's just some choices where you could get a 24-year-old prospect who had 6 points last season, or a 23-year-old prospect that had 9 points last season. So a lot of it was that we were just focusing on the defense, and a lot of the people in the group, because we kind of all took, I had an older D-core, and then when I started seeing my group members and the way that they did it, I kind of thought, oh, or was mine too old? So there was just, the goaltending was something that we kind of had some debate on. Choosing a young goalie like Jonas Corpusala who can go from the AHL to the NHL and had some issues this season being a backup, but would be really good behind Marc-Andre Fleury. And talking to a couple other people, actually saw James Reimer as a starter. So it's interesting with the ages with our goaltenders, but I felt like putting a lot of money in there was the right thing to do. And so we found a bunch of young defensemen, and then we managed to get some veterans such as Hughes and McQuaid. And again, with forwards, it was very difficult to pick. We had about 5 or 6 unanimous decisions within our group, but otherwise it was it was hard to pick from Arizona, and Philadelphia actually caused some issues. But besides that, it's hard to figure this out.
Did a knife fight break out over Bobby Ryan?
Actually, we were all pretty good with that one. But what we actually had a lot of talks at the end. We waited for Los Angeles because we couldn't figure out if we wanted to do a Dustin Brown or risk Mary Gabrick. And so that was really interesting that in the end we kind of just went, we will go with Nick Shore. But overall, there was a lot of things that we kind of went, we'll wait till the end, because it was just, it wouldn't be a make or break, and they all kind of, there was no major space between if they were that bad or that good.
Well, you made the right choice. Nobody wants to do a Brown.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the Metropolitan here. Pacific? This must be the latest Pacific.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Andrew or Michael.
Let's go with Mike.
Okay.
So, big picture, I'd say we took a pretty similar approach to yourself, Rob, where we saw it as, Vegas' priorities would be to build and win over the long term, less so than the first 2 seasons. And we really approached it as sort of an asset gathering exercise where there's maybe even as many as 10 contracts where a throwaway is too strong of a language, but maybe they could offload the contract for a low-end pick, but that we don't think those players will necessarily ever show up in the roster. And then besides that, there was a lot of homogeneity between the types of players in terms of low scoring, strong defensive play, but where possible we try to prioritize speed and skill and youth and contract value, so younger guys who are RFA deals or DLC. And then just beyond that, really the picks fell into 4 main buckets, I guess. So the young guys who you see as actually having good potential, so guys like Matt Dumba or Josh Manson, or that's part of why we picked Malcolm Subban, is he hasn't had an amazing track record, but he could grow. Then second are guys who have potential, or they're contributors, but they're not super young. So like Greg Smith or Travis Hammonick. And then third, in terms of where Vegas could get value, are outbound rental. Guys who could be a good rental next year. So come the trade deadline, people like Luis Dempniak or Benoit Pouliot, there might be a trade market there. And then last, for a couple highlights, so Ranta we see as the goalie of the future for Vegas, sort of like you mentioned, Rob. And Jimmy Howard was a point of debate, but we sort of concluded that I think it would make sense for Vegas to take one or two big contracts if the team incentivizes them with a pick. And we thought, given Detroit's cap situation, they might get paid to take Howard. And that was our sort of judgment call on him as a goalie.
Okay. Last one, and then we'll open up to questions. Which one are we missing?
Central.
Central? This must be it. They're back to back, but does that look right?
Like I said, it depends on the goalies.
Okay, goalies, we got.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so with my team, we really prioritize a mix of youth as well as ability. So, if it came down to, maybe a young guy who's maybe 21, 22 years old, as compared to a guy who's maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, maybe a little bit better, we decided to go with the younger guy who has, the potential to grow into a better player than the veteran is right now. So we didn't really prioritize completely winning this year, being that competitive this year over the long term, but we do feel like we did feel like we picked a reasonably competitive team based on what we had. We did agree on right away a number of players, quite a few. One example I can think of where it came down to a young guy versus veterans is, I picked Nikita Nesterov personally to take from Montreal, and we ended up going with Charles Hudon based on his age and his potential and his ceiling. And actually, the consensus for Chicago with pretty much all you teams was taking Trevor Van Riemsdyk. We actually went with Dennis Rasmussen, and that was actually Sean Tierney's idea at first. The rest of us had picked Van Riemsdyk, so that was on him to kind of sell us on that. We ended up actually agreeing based on his age and his position. Actually, we decided as a center, a guy who's you could play a 200-foot game and be similar defensively to Van Riemsdyk. We kind of prioritized that and felt that would be a better fit than Van Riemsdyk would long term.
Great. So now we're ready for questions. Questions about our chosen protection lists, or our rosters, or how to build a model, or where to buy stat shot. We have lots of.
Just a question on, or comment more with regards to the Oilers. I think the Pacific team got it right in terms of the most likely player to be unprotected from the Oilers and be selected, which is probably Benoit Pouliot. I think Lopescu is probably going to end up being protected, and Kyra, who's on this list, is not eligible, I don't think, or automatically protected, however you want to consider it, because I don't think he's played enough games. But we might see something like, I think I follow the Oilers very closely, so I'm confident to say this. We might see a big surprise, like we might see Chiarelli choose to leave a high-profile player unprotected because of contract considerations and essentially use it as a salary dump. And I think if he could, I kind of wonder if you might see, it's a little outrageous, but we might possibly see RNH or Lucic left unprotected, if he can convince Lucic to waive his MMC.
Personally, from Boston, knowing Peter Chiarelli's style of management from his time in Boston, I can't imagine even considering thinking of exposing Lucic. I think he really loves Lucic and his style of play, especially after just 1 year of that contract. He played pretty well alongside McDavid. I don't think he'll be exposing him at all.
Sure, so the only thing I'll add in terms of how we thought about the Edmonton protection list, the two things I'll say are going between Kazian and Lander, who are the sort of last two added. All the forwards before them and the defensemen are pretty short putts, I guess. But for Kazian and Lander, we thought, those guys might not merit using a spot on, but the alternatives weren't great either. So to Rob's point about transactions leading up to the draft, we think Edmonton could be a team to take a forward that someone else can't protect and then use them in that spot. Because I don't think they're losing much sleep if they lose one of those guys.
Well, I'm just supposed to go to the KHL
Next question. Yep.
So I noticed Kirby Reichel on a roster, and he's not going to meet the 40-70. So much of the similar question, is that more an issue of not really paying attention to that particular requirement? Or is that, I mean, are we just trying to pick the best possible roster? He's 38 games short, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's I don't know how many people made this mistake, but one person picked Kirby Reichel by mistake and immediately realized it, but had already submitted the things. And so in the rosters that were submitted to me, he was replaced with Antoine Bibeau. And so, for instance, the models that I showed you include Bibeau and not Reichel. So that may have been repeated, in which case I have no defense. But in the one case I know about, it was fixed.
Next question.
What made you choose Martin over Braun?
Who picked Martin over Braun? Back there? Okay, which teammate do you want to throw under the bus on that one?
Yeah, I won't throw anyone under the bus, but I mean, I think that was, I mean, there were a handful of judgment calls where when you're making 30 picks, you just have to get something at some point. And I think we saw Martin as, he's quite old, but we do see him as part of the core of the team there in St. Louis, or in San Jose rather, sorry. But to your point, there's some where, there's an equally strong or stronger argument to take the alternative of the judgment call.
Good. Up there? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you agree more in your group or agree less in your groups, like on who to put on the roster?
I had a huge fight on my team. Let's do this one at a time here. How much agreement did you have, would you say, on your rosters? Yeah, you who's first, yeah.
I really think Chicago was our biggest disagreement because Sean Tierney picked Dennis Rasmussen when the rest of us had picked Trevor Van Riemsdyk, so it was kind of up to Sean to convince us on and sell us on Rasmussen. I think that was our biggest disagreement. As I mentioned, I picked Nestor at first from Montreal. I was a big holdout on him for a while. But other than that, a lot of us didn't take a ton of, there wasn't a whole lot of arguing, there wasn't really a whole lot of holdouts. It was, if there was a disagreement, it was kind of, we ran the numbers and kind of compared and talked about it. It was pretty straightforward to kind of convince everyone from there and come to a consensus.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say there was healthy disagreement. There was no knife fights that Rob alluded to over Bobby Ryan. But we did come from different perspectives. I think 2 of the 3 of us were more thinking asset gathering, and one was thinking more how can Vegas win in the next couple of years. So there was a good discussion over what philosophy to take.
As far as the Atlantic Division goes, the Florida Panthers we found to be an interesting debate, Pissick versus Petrovic. At the end of the day, we elected to protect one and pick the other, so I guess maybe that's a bit of a toss-up. One of the biggest surprises, so not so much disagreement, but just something that might have generated some thought or discussion regarding the Anaheim Ducks. The idea that they would expose Silverberg as a result of BX's no move and some of the no moves that they have, that seems to be a fireable offense. And I would argue that any of the most popular consensus picks that Rob showed in his slide deck, those players are they have to be moved. And the ones that don't, I would look to their general managers to be in the hot seat, because that's not the position you want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, in the Metro, we had some disagreements, but we were almost too nice to each other because somebody would say, oh, well, how about this person? And we'd all go, oh, okay. But overall, it was a lot of discussion, and I mean, I was kind of stuck on Dustin Brown for a little bit because in my head, because I've heard him being called a knight since last year, I was kind of holding on to him, but Manson was brought up, and immediately we all looked at the numbers and went, oh, yeah, we should choose him. So overall, we did have some disagreements, but we were very passive and be like, oh, okay, if that's what you wanted, that's fine.
might also add that if we do have questions for Cap Friendly, that we can run a microphone up to them as well, if someone has questions about that. And what's the next question? Oh, it's from Cap Friendly. No, it's from Jack. Okay.
So my question is actually about something that hasn't been touched on at all, is that what are Gerard Gallant's coaching effects?
Sorry, that for me?
I mean, for anyone who has an opinion on this, based on his overall impact, because he has coached in Columbus and he was an assistant in Montreal, and based on his overall impact or his style impact, like, has there been any research on that?
Someone want to talk about coaching impacts? No one wants to talk about coaching impacts, Jack? Oh, Micah does. He wants to talk about.
So this is the short answer is not really. So it's still, Rob was talking about prediction models, and all of the popular prediction models still have blind spots for coaching effects. It's extremely difficult, and what has been done for coaching is on the whole not integratable with other things. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to talk about coaching, or I'm going to talk about some particular effect. But it's another thing to say, I'm going to add that in to a model that already does all of these other things and make sure that it's weighted properly. So, that's an elaborate way of saying no.
I've got some coaching metrics. In fact, if you purchase the original blue 2013 hockey abstract, you'll see my coaching metrics summarized. And I've discovered, and Chuck, I think you've read this. I've discovered that coaches can have an impact that can range up to 5 or 6 points in the standings for really gifted coaches, like say Quenneville or Hitchcock or Boudreau. But Gallant is sort of in that middle of the pack. So I think, especially in year one, I wouldn't expect his impact to be more than a couple of points, if that. But that's just sort of 2 points, like it's not much to go on. Yeah, up front.
Okay, so I just quickly went through the rosters, and from Nashville, it looked like it was mostly a choice, at least from my very brief research, between Craig Smith, Colin Wilson, and Kelly Ehrenkrog. And like, again, a very brief look kind of shows that they all had a similar impact on Nashville. So how did you choose between those three players for the Nashville pick specifically?
For the protection or for just on the roster?
To choose in the expansion draft.
Okay. Who wants to, do you want to?
Close your eyes and point. Because it gets to the point, like, I found this so mentally exhausting because in my group, we each chose our own Vegas team and then made a spreadsheet and compared. And you get to some points where you have, because I know I looked at Ryan Smith and Colin Wilson, just the two of them, and I looked and I was like, well, they're basically the same player with the same points, and they're both good, and so it was kind of, at that point I might go for the younger one person, except that there was probably like a year or two difference in age. But overall, it did get really exhausting with things like that, where you would look at that, and I mean, you might, when you go deeper into advanced analytics and statistics and stuff, it might be a little deeper, but otherwise it was really tough to make those kind of decisions.